Let's look at the past 5 number 1 overall picks in the NFL and where they went to college. We got 2 quarterbacks from Oklahoma, 2 players from the SEC, and Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson. Okay, now let's move back to the past 8 years. Okay, some programs that might not be the best now, but were thriving in our Power 5 programs. Okay, now let's go to the past 9 years. Oh. Yeah, so teams can draft outside of those modern-day Power 5 clubs, and since the NFL-AFL merger in 1970, this happened 6 times. These 6 players that I'm about to talk about have some of the wildest stories and backgrounds I've come across. Don't believe me? Well, out of the 6 players, we have a guy who almost had to cut off his leg, a guy who said once that he liked boxing more than football, a guy who has some of the worst records in NFL history, a guy who pretended to be Tom Brady, and a guy who played in the MAC. I'm Kevin Redfield from the Dropout Sports, and let's get right into it. Hold up. Before we get right into the video, I just gotta ask y'all to like it and subscribe to the channel. Every like, every view, and every sub is just one piece of love that helps me keep going. Alright, bring back the music, and let's get right into it. To start off, we have one of the most recognizable names and faces in all of football, Terry Bradshaw. Old heads know him as the guy that led the Steel Curtain Steelers to 4 Super Bowl victories, and newer fans know him as the old yet energetic analyst on Fox NFL Sundays. But before both of those times in his life, Bradshaw was a legend in the state of Louisiana. At Woodlawn High School in Shreveport, Bradshaw led his football team to a AAA state title game and set a national record in the javelin throw. His reputation grew to the point where he was featured in a 1966 Sports Illustrated edition featuring the most promising high school athletes around the country. But wait, take a closer look at the quote I put on screen. Right there. Isn't LSU a top-level program?
Yes!
Right, so you might be asking why I'm putting Bradshaw in this video. Well, it turns out Terry Bradshaw did initially commit to LSU, but he flipped his decision to go to Louisiana Tech for a couple of reasons. From a practical perspective, he didn't do too well on his ACTs and therefore didn't qualify to receive a scholarship to LSU. But from a purely football perspective, Bradshaw quote-unquote wanted to throw the football. Up until Joe Burrow 3 seasons ago, LSU wasn't known as a gunslinger's university, even when they had real talent at the position. So, Bradshaw decided to run the dice and sit behind future Duck Dynasty star Phil Robertson until his time came. In what's gotta be one of the most fate-driven decisions ever made, Robertson, who had gotten some NFL looks his junior year, decided to quit football and hand the reins over to Bradshaw because football, quote-unquote, interfered with duck hunting season. After that, Bradshaw became known around the college football circles as a can't-miss talent that finished 1st and 3rd in passing yards in the country in his junior and senior years respectively. In 1970, he was the consensus number 1 overall pick, and thanks to a coin flip to decide who got the number 1 pick that year, Terry Bradshaw became a Pittsburgh Steeler. The accolades run deep for him: 4 Super Bowl victories, 3 Pro Bowl nods, an MVP award in 1978, and a first ballot Hall of Famer. There's a lot of stories out there about him, but I want to go back to the one that I alluded to earlier. In 1983, Bradshaw was on his last strides as an NFL quarterback and had to get elbow surgery in the offseason. Since he didn't want to get noticed in the Louisiana-based hospital, he entered under an, at the time, unassuming alias. His alias of choice? Tom Brady. And what I'd consider the cherry on top of the story is that they both ended up wearing number 12. Next up on this list is a guy that probably needs the most introduction out of anyone here. John Matuszak was a Raiders player known for his intimidating size, standing at 6'8", 272 pounds. He initially went to university at Fort Dodge Community College in Iowa before accepting an offer to play tight end at Mizzou his sophomore year. Unfortunately, he didn't really show out the next year and had a scholarship revoked. This forced him to transfer again to the University of Tampa, who in 1971 became a Division I FBS independent. In 1972, the Tampa Spartans went 10-2 with wins over the University of Miami at Florida, and a bowl win against a Kent State team with the then future Hall of Famer Jack Lambert, as well as legendary now coaches like Gary Pinkel and Nick Saban. Tooz, as he would later be called, was drafted first overall by the Houston Oilers in 1973, but it did take him a little while to find his place in the league. Matuszak was traded his rookie year to Kansas City for future Hall of Famer Curly Culp. After 2 years in Kansas City, he was traded to Washington, where he was released almost as soon as he got there, due to his character issues and not being able to show out for the coaches. Tooz then signed with the Oakland Raiders in 1976, and for the next 6 years, he became a force on their defensive line. The Raiders have always been the team to embrace players known for having bad attitudes, so the pairing of Tooz in silver and black fit all too well. In his 6 years there, he helped them win 2 Super Bowls next to a wicked D-line featuring him, Otis Sistrunk, Ted Hendricks, and so on and so forth. Tooz retired at the age of 31 and embarked on a second career as an actor. His first role was in the cult classic sports film North Dallas 40, and along with that he had featuring roles in 9 other films. His most iconic role was in 1985 when he played Sloth in The Goonies. On the smaller screen, Tooz got guest roles on many TV shows including Dukes of Hazzard, Miami Vice, The A-Team, and my favorite part of his, a recurring role as an openly gay former linebacker on a show called Hollywood Beat. Unfortunately, John Matuszak died in 1989 at the age of 39. Today, he might not be as well known or a household name as some of these other guys, but in contributing to some of the greatest Raiders teams ever and being a prominent character in multiple movies of his time, Tooz left a cultural staple bigger than many NFL players can claim. The year after Matuszak was drafted, the Dallas Cowboys took Ed Too Tall Jones out of Tennessee State in 1974. Jones only played 3 high school football games and initially went to TSU on a basketball scholarship. But after his sophomore season, he decided to drop basketball in pursuit of a football career. In 3 seasons under head coach John Merritt, Jones was a 2-time All-American and won 2 black college football national championships. With the Cowboys' only number 1 overall pick in their history, they selected Ed Too Tall Jones, making him the first and as of now only number 1 overall pick to hail from an HBCU. In his first stint with the Cowboys, Jones started 4 of his first 5 seasons and helped them win Super Bowl 12. After the 1978 season, Ed Jones tried his hand at boxing, going 6-0 against mostly non-recognizable boxers during 1979. At this time, he publicly stated that boxing was his favorite sport, but the itch to go back and play football was all too apparent at the time. Jones came back to the Cowboys during the 1980 season and ended up playing better than his first stint there. He ended up playing for 10 more seasons where he made 3 Pro Bowls and was an All-Pro in 1982. During his total time in Dallas, he played in 224 games and started 203 of those games, both of which are game totals that have only recently been beaten by Jason Witten and LP Ledesure. Today, Too Tall Jones is not in the Hall of Fame, but his footprint on those 70s and 80s Cowboys teams cannot be understated. Now onto a more fresh era in people's minds, the next non-Power 5 pick didn't come until 2002, when the expansion Houston Texans selected David Carr out of Fresno State. Carr lived in Bakersfield, California, and played ball at Stockdale High School. He almost signed to Washington, but living in Fresno for 3 years and watching them play growing up as a kid was enough to pull Carr away from the Power 5 glitz and glamour. It took David a couple of years to get up to that starting role, and after an average 2000 season, Carr went out and showcased his talents. In 2001, David Carr led the Fresno State Bulldogs to an 11-3 record while recording school records in single-season passing yards and touchdowns, both of which were eventually broken by his brother Derek in 2013. The impressive showing raised NFL eyebrows, and in a rather lacking quarterback class that year, Carr did enough to stand out. Since the Houston Texans didn't have a quarterback and had that number 1 pick, it was just all too enticing to pick Carr there, and so they did. His NFL career was marred by inefficiency and a lack of surrounding talent. In his rookie year, Carr was sacked a still season record 76 times, and in his first 5 years he was sacked 249 times. Again, another record that still stands today. In his 5 years as the Texans starter, David Carr went 22-53. After a stint there, he served as a backup in Carolina, San Francisco, and for the Giants, where he won a Super Bowl ring. Now on to the 5th player on this list, and the person who may have overcome the most physical adversity out of any NFL player ever, Alex Smith. Coming out of Helix High School in La Mesa, California, Smith, despite leading his team to a 25-1 record, was only a 2-star recruit. Although recruitment was light for him, being picked up by Ron McBride and eventually playing under Urban Meyer and Kyle Whittingham in Utah was one of the biggest blessings in Alex Smith's life. Oh, and before I forget, yes, Utah is currently in the Pac-12, but at the time, they were in the Mountain West, so exception. In his first year as a starter, he led the Utes to a 10-2 record with efficient quarterback play. The next year only got better, as he led Utah to a perfect 12-0 record while scoring 42 combined touchdowns with only 4 interceptions. Aaron Rodgers was his only competition in the 2005 NFL Draft, and with the 49ers not sure about his character issues, Smith was the go-to number 1 pick. Unfortunately, Alex Smith's initial time in San Fran was a hodgepodge of highs and lows. In his first 6 years, Smith was in and out of the starting job due to injuries and inconsistent play. During that stretch, he had 5 different offensive coordinators and didn't record a single winning season. That was until one man came in. Jim Harbaugh was introduced as the 49ers head coach in 2011 and gave Smith the last chance he took straight advantage of. He started all 16 games, the first time he had done so since his 2nd year, and he led the team to a 13-3 record. The next year he got injured and was benched the rest of the season for Colin Kaepernick, and although he was traded to the Chiefs after that season, the league now knew that Smith was more than just a game manager. He was a game winner. His 5 years in Kansas City fully embodied the new and improved Alex Smith, as he had a winning record every year and paved the way for Patrick Mahomes to thrive in Andy Reid's system. His next chapter in Washington got off to a decent start, but in a single play, everything came crashing down.
Here comes the blitz. And there goes Alex Smith down at the 40-yard line. Kareem Jackson. Alex Smith is down.
Smith suffered a spiral and compound fracture to his tibia and fibula in his right leg. And after the initial surgery, Smith developed life-threatening sepsis that required 17 more surgeries to handle. He almost had to amputate his right leg, but after that 21 months of recovery and rehab, Smith was back and ready to play. In Week 5 of the 2020 season, he came back in for an injured Kyle Allen and took a scary Aaron Donald hit. In that moment, fans of both teams feared for the worst, but just like he had done so much of his career, Alex Smith got back up. In fact, after coming in Week 9 again, he went 5-1 as a starter the rest of the season and helped Washington to get to the playoffs. Smith earned Comeback Player of the Year, but that offseason he was released and subsequently retired. The last guy on this list is probably the most improbable out of anyone to be a number 1 overall pick, let alone a first rounder. Eric Fisher went to Stony Creek High School in Rochester Hills, Michigan. Playing against lesser talent, he was able to be a pretty good lineman, but standing in at only 230 pounds wouldn't fly at the Division I level. As a 2-star prospect, Fisher went to Central Michigan, one of only 2 schools to offer him a scholarship. It took him all 4 years of eligibility, and his teams might not have been the best, but in his senior year, Eric Fisher showed out during the regular season and specifically in the Senior Bowl, enough to become the number 1 overall pick in 2013 to the Chiefs. His only competition was Luke Joeckel, and considering Joeckel only lasted 5 seasons, the Chiefs made the right choice there for sure. So far, Fisher's career has been somewhat rocky, as it took him 6 years to get a Pro Bowl nod, and in 2020, when he got a second Pro Bowl selection, he was released by the Chiefs. Last year, he signed with the Indianapolis Colts, and this past season, he struggled to keep his starting job there. Currently, Eric Fisher is a free agent. All 6 of these guys may not have had the smoothest or best roads to the NFL, but the fact that they all came from smaller schools and ended up being seen as better than everyone in their class is something that at least deserves recognition. If beating the odds were a group of people, these guys would be them, especially Alex Smith. Bust or not, they all have great stories and they all made it. Point blank, period, they all made it. Thank y'all for watching.
Just a bunch of dropouts.